just breaking right now across the wires. President Trump is ordering a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers going into and out of Venezuela, saying that the armada around Venezuela will only get bigger, and that the Venezuelan regime has been designated a foreign terrorist organization, crossing on all the wires coming from the Trump administration and the president himself. A blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers into Venezuela as we look at some of those drug boat takeouts. That's a significant move.
So I figured this was an issue we might as well cover, given that I've spent the past 2 weeks doing a press work at the Pentagon, kind of trying to understand behind the scenes what's happening here. And it's the fact that tonight, President Trump is announcing a total and complete naval blockade against any and all oil tankers leaving the country of Venezuela. So that's right, things are starting to get pretty real here, although if you've been paying attention, this shouldn't be all that surprising given the maximum pressure campaign that we've already seen thus far, whether that's the drone strikes against Venezuelan drug traffickers. They recently did seize an individual oil tanker, and it's been widely reported that the Trump government did give the Maduro government an ultimatum for him to leave power and leave the presidency there. But I do want to break down the Venezuela issue here today, because I think this is something, frankly, a lot of people don't really understand exactly what is going on. Obviously, you have a bunch of bad faith idiots on the left who will stand there and say that we are killing innocent fishermen or some garbage like that. But sincerely, I'm sure there are many people on the America First right wing asking the questions of, well, I thought we were no new wars. Is this going to be another Iraq war? Is this Bush-style neoconservatism? And although we certainly can't say for sure what's going to happen, I'm going to explain for you why everything I've gathered thus far, that doesn't seem to be the case. And by the way, the motives for doing this are extremely America First, but it does take some explaining. So let's break that down for you in today's video. We'll talk all about this Venezuela issue and the new announcement. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. We greatly appreciate the support. And that said, I guess let's start off here by simply reading for you the Trump statement on the issue, and then we'll break down what it actually means. So here we go. Venezuela is completely surrounded at the moment by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. It will only get bigger, and the shock to them will be like nothing they have ever seen before, until such time as they return to the United States of America all of the oil, land, and other assets that they previously stole from us. So if you're curious the context here, essentially you could argue maybe a big reason why certain aspects of the American intelligence community, business interests in this country have historically been against the socialist Venezuelan government is because of the fact that when Hugo Chavez took power several decades ago, Venezuela was a country that, although it was prosperous, the complaint by, the socialist side was that it was heavily influenced and controlled by American oil companies. And so basically he pushed them out. He nationalized the oil industry. We owned a lot of that stuff. And he basically just took it, obviously, without really compensating our government or asking for our permission. We'll talk about that later in the video, but just for context there, that is basically the ultimatum being given here. We're going to blockade all your oil unless you return to us what was stolen. And interestingly, some of you might point and say, well, that is not exactly having to do directly with the drug problem. But here's the thing. Drugs, migration, and the oil/socialist thing, they're all kind of interconnected for a reason we'll explain later. But anyways, let's keep reading for you here the statement. The illegitimate Maduro regime is using oil from the stolen oil fields to finance themselves, drug terrorism, human trafficking, murder, and kidnapping. So you can see to a degree, right? The Trump government is essentially saying that, well, we care about this drug problem. We care about this migration problem. But as they've long made the argument basically by the way, since the beginning, right? The state government essentially, the State Department, I should say, basically did this on day one of the Trump administration, closely linked the activities of the Maduro government to the narco-terrorism and mass migration, which is to say the government themselves are sponsoring the things that are hurting the United States. Again, we'll explain this more later, but just kind of keep some of these themes in mind. So for the theft of our assets and many other reasons, including terrorism, drug smuggling, and human trafficking, the Venezuelan regime has been designated a foreign terrorist organization. Therefore, today I am ordering a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers going into and out of Venezuela. The illegal aliens and criminals that the Maduro regime has sent into the United States during the weak and inept Biden administration are being returned to Venezuela at a rapid pace. America will not allow criminals, terrorists, or other countries to rob, threaten, or harm our nation, and likewise will not allow a hostile regime to take our oil, land, or any other assets, all of which must be returned to the United States immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So there you have it. But that said, I'm sure that many people hear that and still ask themselves questions like, okay, but what's really going on? Why are we really doing this? What are we seeking to achieve? And what is the benefit to the ordinary American person? And for those answers, I would like to direct everyone to a document that the Trump administration quietly published in November 2025, just a couple of weeks ago, that outlines the national security strategy of the United States of America. Because if you're confused, if you feel like the answers you've heard from certain government officials maybe were not the most satisfactory, let me just say this is going to outline very clearly for everyone what's actually happening. So let's read for you some of these portions. I mean, first of all, they start off by just defining what a national security strategy is, but the highlighted portions here tell you a lot about really what's going on in the minds of, Trump and many of his advisors here. So let's read for you. This is very telling in my opinion. First and foremost, a strategy must evaluate, sort, and prioritize. Not every country, region, issue, or cause, however worthy, can be the focus of American strategy. The purpose of foreign policy is the protection of core national interests. That is the sole focus of this strategy. But it goes on. American strategies since the end of the Cold War have fallen short. They have been laundry lists of wishes or desired end states and have not clearly defined what we want, but instead stated vague platitudes and have often misjudged what we should want. So this is very interesting. Let's break that down. Because for anyone thinking that Trump has magically betrayed you with this, he's become George Bush, he's a neocon now. No, this national security strategy, which is the guiding document for everything going on, and you can see it if you're paying attention, is actually a direct refutation of neoconservatism. What is it saying? First and foremost, America cannot care about every global conflict around the world, right? All these wars in the Middle East, arguably even Eastern Europe, because we did that, not just Ukraine, but you think of even the Yugoslavia stuff back in the 1990s. Like, we have to start bringing our strategic focus closer to home. It's not our duty to fight the world's wars. So make that clear, right? This is them saying that neoconservatism is a bad thing, and it goes on. After the end of the Cold War, American foreign policy elites convinced themselves that permanent American domination of the entire world was in the best interest of our country. Yet the affairs of other countries are our concern only if their activities directly threaten our interests. So again, what is that saying? Although Nicolas Maduro may be a bad guy, we're not seeking a conflict here or whatever we're doing. Let's keep that ambiguous. But whatever's going on here, it's not about, oh, he's a dictator or, oh, he's a bad socialist that mistreats his people. That's unfortunate, but America simply cannot use that alone to justify, we can't topple every bad guy in the world because then we'd be here forever. But, what the Trump government's making very clear to people is what they see in Venezuela is a direct national security interest to the United States of America. And after all, you could argue this is something of the reinvention of the Monroe Doctrine, right? And notice, this is not alone. What were some of the two sort of, people made memes out of it, people laughed at it, people didn't understand it. But why was it in Trump's inauguration speech, he specifically, if you remember, made a point to mention the United States wanting to annex Greenland and retake the Panama Canal? Why? Because that's, again, the strategy here. It's basically saying America needs to care about its own hemisphere. We're going to kind of withdraw from all this Middle Eastern and faraway stuff and say, no. The place we care about, the place with the most interests of the United States and its people is closer to home. And by the way, let me just say principally, we'll talk about this more in a second. I actually have no issue with that, right? There's a difference between, say, neoconservatism, which is exactly what's being outlined here, and what you might call classical American imperialism, right? Talking about sort of American foreign policy of the 1800s, the early 1900s, where dating back to the Monroe Doctrine, this was always a thing. The United States has always taken an interest in what's happening in our own hemisphere. And we kind of always have been the top power, the top dog in that region. And as we should be. Because, yeah, obviously it affects us in some ways, and we'll talk about that in a second. But let's kind of continue on here. Our elites badly miscalculated America's willingness to shoulder forever global burdens to which the American people saw no connection to the national interests. They overestimated America's ability to fund simultaneously a massive welfare, regulatory, administrative state alongside a massive military, diplomatic, intelligence, and foreign aid complex. They placed hugely misguided and destructive bets on globalism and so-called free trade that hollowed out the very middle class and industrial base on which American economic and military preeminence depend. And it goes on, which is completely true, by the way. And again, I say, just a couple of weeks ago, this is the guiding doctrine. Don't get any misconceptions. He didn't suddenly become a globalist. This is absolutely, absolutely America first. And it kind of goes on to say the same thing, right? Again, specific questions. What should the United States want? What are our available means to get it? And how can we connect ends and means into a viable national security strategy? So what is that further saying? Let's not fight wars because we want a democracy or something like that. No, directly, there needs to be a specific kind of tangible goal, not some vague ideological thing that we're dealing with. Notably, when you read Trump's statement, he doesn't necessarily say, well, socialism has to go, or we want freedom or something, like kind of those like vague neocon slogans of democracy. No, he straight up says, return our oil, return our assets. There's something tangible here we're asking for. And yes, that's the goal. Okay. As well as, obviously, a big reason they want that is because they want to stop the kind of human and narco trafficking that's happening there. But if it's still not clear, I think this page right here really explains what's going on in the Caribbean and what's going on in Venezuela. Okay. The United States must reconsider our military presence in the Western Hemisphere. Oh, wait, they've been doing that, right? This is why sometimes the documents like this, they don't get talked about a lot. They don't get covered a lot. Maybe I'm reading too much or it's getting kind of boring. I hope it's not, because this is very important information. And for people who say the Trump administration hasn't told us what's happening. No, they're telling you exactly what's happening, but this stuff doesn't get covered because it's long and boring. And by the way, if people read it, I'd argue, as it pertains to the mainstream media, they'd actually find this pretty convincing because what they're saying here is completely true, right? But anyways, all right. This means 4 obvious things. First of all, number 1, a readjustment of our global military presence to address urgent threats in our hemisphere. So again, they're saying we're going to focus less on the Middle East. We're going to focus right on our southern border, essentially, right? Especially the missions identified in this strategy and away from theaters whose relative import to the American national security has declined in recent decades or years. Again, 9/11 was what? 24 years ago at this point, almost 25 years ago. Yes, some issues in the Middle East still matter to us, but clearly there's a problem at home, especially south of the border, as we're going to keep saying again, that has been ignored and we got to do something about it. Sure, absolutely. Number 2, a more suitable Coast Guard and Navy presence to control sea lanes, to thwart illegal and other unwanted migration, to reduce human and drug trafficking, and to control key transit routes in a crisis. So there's 2 things going on there. First and foremost is the very issue I've been alluding to here, which is illegal migration and drug trafficking, which, by the way, are absolutely connected issues because it is largely the cartels who sponsor those very migrant caravans who come here to this border. So again, so now I'm going to address the question of a lot of people are probably asking, okay, Venezuela, I don't like the government, whatever. What does it matter to me? This is why it matters to you. Personally, I don't care a whole lot about the whole American oil thing. It'd be nice to have the oil, but am I willing to send the military to do something about it? Probably not, right? But this is something where I'm like, okay, that's my issue. Because I think when it comes to let's first of all say, basically every Latin American country has been complicit in this issue for decades, but especially over the past 4 years, where, sure, America opened its border, and that's a problem. But why exactly have so many of countries' own governments, first of all, allowed it to happen? Because those people walk up all the way from usually like Panama, right, that far south. Why are they not doing anything? How is it very neighborly or friendly of them to not do much to fight or crack down on the cartel? And I think in the case of Venezuela, that's very exceptional, because while it's true, sure, a lot of countries could be wrapped up in this. Hey, why'd you sponsor and allow the migrant invasion of our country? Specifically in the case of Venezuela. A major sort of international law issue that the United States has been having with them for months is the fact that they're one of the few countries that refuses to take back their own deportees. What does that mean? When we deport their citizens and try to get them on planes, Venezuela says, no, we won't take them back, okay? So this is a country that Trump has often talked about, right? They emptied their prisons. They sent the worst of the worst, right? Tren de Aragua, Venezuelan gangs and cartels, bad people, have popped up in the United States. The nation did that on purpose, by the way, the Maduro government, because they knew it would be something to undermine and terrorize the United States. And then finally, when we get leadership who says that's not happening anymore, go back, they won't take them back, which is in violation of international law for whatever that means. It's just also highly unethical. They're your citizens. You wonder, by the way, why we've had to, for instance, send Tren de Aragua members to prisons in El Salvador instead. Remember that whole issue from a couple months ago? That's the reason why. The Venezuelan government, in an openly hostile act, will not take back its own citizens. And to me, that is a hostile act, right? To me, that's an act of war. So that's why I'm looking at it and saying, when you combine that with drugs, that matters, okay? And that's my gripe, say, for why I care about Venezuela. I support the pressure campaign. Do I support necessarily an Iraq-style war? No, but you have to do something about this. And then secondly, there's the other issue here, controlling the sea lanes, controlling key transit routes in a crisis, okay? We'll talk about it maybe a little bit later, but another kind of under-the-radar issue that wasn't talked about until Trump magically started saying, retake the Panama Canal, is also the fact that China and hostile actors kind of in that hemisphere have started to sort of collude together, right? A lot of Latin American governments have opened up a lot more to China. I think China at the time was controlling huge chunks of the Panama Canal. And obviously that's a national security concern for us, okay? Because if our economy is relying on our own shipping and our own exports and all this stuff, and right at our own borders, you have our foreign rivals and adversaries are basically threatening our own shipping lanes. Yeah, absolutely. The U.S. Navy probably should stop going to other places and say, we need to secure our own hemisphere. And again, I say, it is absolutely within the bounds of America first. It is reasonable foreign policy to say, yes, the issues closest to home matter the most. And again, that's my issue with the Venezuelan government, okay? It's not necessarily just that they're socialists. That's bad. But yeah, I'm not willing to fight a war over that. It's not about the oil necessarily, but that migration issue, which I think absolutely is, something that is probably the single greatest threat we face as a nation, is this immigration problem. I will say that. I think it's very patriotic that the Trump administration has basically designated illegal immigration and drug trafficking as no longer just police or law enforcement issues, but national security and military issues. That's a big step, and that's essentially what's being said here. Okay. But you have that. All right. Targeted deployments to secure the border and defeat cartels. Oh, we've seen that, right? Of the military. He just said it. These are military issues. It's a hostile invasion. It's not a civil thing anymore, right? Including, where necessary, the use of lethal force to replace the failed law enforcement only strategy of the last several decades. In other words, again, no longer a police issue. And establishing or expanding access in strategically important locations. The United States, as you've been seeing, by the way, will prioritize commercial diplomacy to strengthen our own economy and industries using tariffs and reciprocal trade as powerful tools. The goal for our partner nations to build up their domestic economies while an economically stronger and more sophisticated Western Hemisphere becomes an increasingly attractive market for American commerce and investment. There you have it. Now, of course, another reason I bring this up is because the criticism I've often heard from progressives and leftists about this whole issue is that they're trying to say, oh, this is really about the oil, right? This is another greedy American imperialist war, all about, giving more to the oil companies. And here's the thing. I will say this. Don't get me wrong. Yes, American oil interests definitely have a reason to want to see Nicolas Maduro go in Venezuela. Sure. And sure, I would argue that probably the reason the CIA and our intelligence kind of community has been so obsessed with Venezuela, they said it's because of socialism. It's really probably because of that oil thing. But here's what I say in response. Okay, clearly we've outlined why the Venezuela issue is about more than just oil, but say it is about oil. Okay, so what? I know. Whoa. Are you a neocon? No. Actually, the neocons don't fight wars over oil. We'll explain that. So what? It would be of genuine benefit to the United States if we opened the Venezuelan market and got our stuff back. Most notably because it would, guess what? Lower oil and gas and energy prices even more in this country. Which, if you notice too, like a big reason why Trump is spending so much time in the Middle East, in like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, some foreign visits that got heavily criticized, very similar as well. A lot of Trump's foreign policy, if you have not noticed, has to do revolving around the issue of trying to lower oil and gas prices for the ordinary American. In this case, that'd be no exception, right? But I thought the Iraq war was about oil. Actually, no, it was not. Right? As Trump famously said on the debate stage back in 2016, the dumbest thing about that war is we went into there, did this whole nation-building experiment, and didn't even take the oil back. Because guess what? If you're going to do regime change, if you're going to push these types of things, I've long been of the opinion, not that I even necessarily support it, but at least get the benefit out of it. It's stupid that America actually did all that sacrifice for Iraq and didn't get the oil. As it pertains right now to the Syria situation, I have long said I think the Obama regime change experiment there was stupid and idiotic. But now that it's done, you might as well build the pipeline, right? Get the benefit out of it. Same situation here. It would be of our benefit if the American oil companies, instead of the Venezuelan government, got it. Again, I don't think it's just about that. But even then, okay, so yeah, we're kind of classical American imperialists again. Yeah, we showed up with our naval ships and said, like Commodore Matthew Perry back in the 1800s and said, you better open up your markets and give us money. I mean, it's kind of cool, is it not? Like that's actually kind of awesome, right? Like, don't get me wrong. I absolutely think that oil interests are partially motivating the Trump administration here. Like, what percent is illegal drugs and migration? What percentage is oil? Who knows? But again, I say, okay, so I have my reasons. The oil companies have theirs. They intersect. And at the end of the day, it's like, oh no, less illegal immigration for the patriots and cheaper oil and gas for everyday Americans. Oh no, what a horrible outcome, right? And here's the thing too, right? Going back to this Monroe Doctrine idea, the Neo-Monroe Doctrine, I guess you could say. Let's also be real about this, folks. It's just an objective fact. Yes, the country of Venezuela is probably the most outwardly hostile nation to us in our own hemisphere in the 21st century, right? Not so much Cuba anymore. It's now Venezuela. And I mean, we are a global power are we not, right? You could say we're still the world superpower, but I think what the Trump administration here is trying to say, no, we want to be a Western hemisphere power. So like, yeah, I mean, to a degree, that does matter to us, does it not? I mean, look at what our adversaries are doing, for example, right? So Russia on their own border thought that they kind of were starting to lose control of Ukraine. They saw that as a national, in terms of like the geopolitical interests, Ukraine's pushing closer to NATO and EU. Russia didn't like that. Say what you will. Okay, I'm not justifying it, but what did Russia do? They said, well, this is not going to happen, right? China has been eyeing Taiwan for a very long time. Who knows what they're going to do there? But certainly they practice their own forms of imperialism. Why shouldn't or can't we do that as well, right? I actually think we should. Like, if we have a hostile regime in our own hemisphere very close to us that's directly sending problems to our borders, yeah, we should. I mean, I'm not saying to invade them necessarily, but we should use our little strategies in one way or another and say, no, we don't support this government, actually, and we don't care who the heck likes it. Yeah, it's actually about us. It's an incredibly selfish decision. It harms us that this person's in power, but you know what? We're freaking America. Who cares, right? Again, that's not neoconservatism. Neocons would say some stupid crap like, well, we want democracy over here, or this guy doesn't agree to like the U.S. global exchange reserve currency or something. Like all this, no, this is a practical foreign policy, right? Let me put it that way. No, it should matter. I think it's absolutely within the United States' national security interest, considering how important kind of the control of the Arctic and the Arctic seas are going to be in the next couple decades. When you look at minerals, shipping lanes, all those things, yeah, we should have Greenland. Okay, Panama Canal. Yeah, why shouldn't the United States say we don't want China? We don't want China here. Get China out of here, right? Does China not get concerned, right? China, by the way, literally, in the Korean War, stepped in and intervened because they said, we don't want American troops directly on our borders, right? Like other normal countries see things these ways. And again, why shouldn't we, So that's my take on the entire situation. By the way, I just tuned into the Fox News coverage of it. And if you had any skepticism that, this is about neoconservatism or something like that, I like to point out, basically, they just brought on a 3-guest panel to all universally decry the decision. They're like, what about Congress? Or they're not explaining what's going on. This is an abuse of power. And it's just like, again, let me just say, if this was about the neocons or their interests, I don't think they'd really be talking like this, would they? They'd probably be beating those war drums. But interestingly, this is something only sort of a select group of America First patriots are actually saying is a good thing. So I think that's very telling as well. But that said, I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on all of this, guys, in the comment section down below. I mean, do you kind of agree with my take on Venezuela? Do you disagree? Let me know why. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.